My name is Brennan Collins. Probably know a little bit about me if you signed up for this, but I teach courses on Maven. I also do coaching for one-on-one and for small groups. I also do corporate training for clients as well. I'm actually training 80 product managers this week for a large client. And this situation of finding the why behind a roadmap you didn't write comes up all the time. And so, especially in these large companies where the product managers are dealing with many stakeholders. I actually had a student today that is from a bank, and he says, well, what if I have 20 different stakeholders coming to me with features all the time? How do I get ahead in that regard? How do I combat that when I can, or say no in some way, or challenge some things when I've already got maybe an existing roadmap, or some of the things that I've got on the roadmap, I have no idea where they came from. And so we work through some concepts about how to do that tactfully with one feature at a time. But what if you've got a roadmap that you're inheriting that what maybe was the former product manager, you inherited their backlog of stuff, and it's kind of hard to figure out, well, what's even the point of it? So we're going to talk about what do you do in those situations to be able to get ahead, to be able to tell your team and give them the right context as to where you're going and why you're going there, and inspire them to work. So I'd ask you that question, and you can respond in the chat. Have you ever been handed a roadmap or a set of features and say, you know what, your job is to just build. You didn't write these features, you didn't come up with a concept, and frankly, you don't understand where they might be coming from or why, what's the point of it all. You know the person they might have come from, but they might have been handed to you through two different people. So somebody talked to your boss and dropped that in. So if that sounds familiar, just put a yes or a one or a thumbs up or something in the chat as well, making sure that I'm appealing to the right audience here as well. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Yes, Dennis. All right. Okay, so at least we kind of understand what we're here for. And I want to tell you about a situation that even applies to me. Yeah, add AI to the product. That's right, bro. That is the most common scenario right now, which we will talk about. So I had a strategy at one point in time. And what I realized that even as a VP of product, I didn't control the roadmap, or at least not the entire roadmap. Yes, it was my job to figure out for all of our teams where we were going. I was even training our sales team and our marketing team on what message to put out there. But the CEO that I had was a visionary guy. He was coming up with ideas all the time, just an ideas machine, and it was outpacing our capacity to get things done. And what I realized was that I was constantly trying to battle that and fight back against it. And so I was just always evaluating any ideas that he brought every morning, and I was evaluating against my strategy. What I didn't realize or work well on was that our strategy together with the CEO wasn't in alignment. So, yes, as much as I wanted to communicate what our strategy was, I was not listening anymore because I had already done all the research. I had all the logic, and I thought my reasoning was sound and it would shine through. But it didn't seem to be working. It didn't work for at least a year as I was working with this new CEO. We were butting heads all the time around this concept, and he was just saying, why don't you just build the things that you're here to build? And I was like, okay, how do I deal with this? And so a lot of this situation that I'm going to be teaching today happened from back 12, 13 years ago when I was first struggling with this as a new VP of product for the first time. And part of that was I needed to have a different perspective that I could learn from somebody because the CEO had a different vantage point. Where was I doing my research? I was talking to customers directly or prospects directly. Yeah, sure. I was also looking at what's possible in the technology field in the industry. I was following regulations. We were in healthcare at the time, so I would read regulations where we were going. So I did a lot of research. I talked to salespeople, but the CEO still has a different vantage point. And I wasn't looking from his lens, and that's what I needed to be doing. He talked to venture capitalists. He talked to investors in our company that were also seeing other patterns among other digital health companies or their customers with their health insurance companies that we were dealing with. He was talking to prospects that I wasn't. He was talking to larger customers potentially earlier on, maybe at the higher level and executive standpoint, where I was talking maybe at more of a director level at our customer site. So he had a different set of inputs that I just wasn't listening to because I thought the strategy is already set. We're good. This is just now an interruption because it's a shiny object. And I needed to think more about how I could have humility and evaluate what he was really bringing to me. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about how what I learned in finally being able to work well with the CEO and other situations that I've been in since with strong stakeholders that want to push features onto product managers, me or other ones that I've coached. So most often we see a list of features. Our roadmap ends up being a delivery timeline. That's not terrible. It's what most people expect. I remember going to a company and the first time I created a now, next, later roadmap that didn't necessarily have dates. It was kind of like, this is 3 months, this is 6 months, this is beyond. The very first question I got was, "Hey, I'm used to seeing a roadmap with delivery dates on it. What is this?" And so there's the expectation that it's going to be a list of features with dates. We understand that, but it does not represent the strategy. When you have just a list, your team is guessing as to what are we doing next and why are we doing it? And so it hurts your team because they don't really understand and they're like, "Well, what's more important and why this, why now kind of thing." The other situation is when you don't have a good strategy that's clear, is the stakeholders around you start pushing you around because you have no foundation to stand on. If you just have a roadmap that's a list of features, well, why not just swap it out with a different feature? Their feature. That one's got to be better than the one that's on here because it's theirs, right? It's so their opinion is on there. So it costs you multiple things by not having a good strategy to stand on. So how do we fix that? What is a strategy? Well, it goes from looking at the list. So this is what everybody sees. So you got, hey, we're going to do a mobile app. We're going to do Salesforce integration. We're going to build what Rahul mentioned, and we're going to add AI to the product as an AI assistant that everybody's doing. Maybe we're going to do SSO for enterprise accounts, redesign everything, add analytics and dashboards, right? These are all probably very common things that you've also experienced or had created features. But it's not a list of like, well, what are we going to do to win in the market? What are we going to do that compounds our growth and our competitive advantage? And that's where we need to get into it with a strategy. And it starts with choosing one specific customer and one specific problem as to what we're focusing on now, and then explaining why them out of everything we could be doing instead of the list. Now, once you have that, the list starts to make a little bit more sense, but you got to start there with a target. So the list that you get oftentimes has at least an understanding of why this and why now, and those choices were made, but you just weren't invited. So they were made in maybe a different conference room between two different executives, and you just get the results of it. Or it's made in the head of one of them and then brought directly to you. But what we see and what we receive is often the solution idea, the end game, right? And the reasoning doesn't come with it, but it's often there. It's either stated and then not told, or it's just unarticulated, and you need to draw it out of the heads of the people that have it. This is how you can then back into the strategy that might exist to say, okay, I know that I have to build the things that I'm being told to build. Like when the CEO would come in, that his ideas are going to get built with or without me. So I need to at least understand that I've got to deliver, but I need the context from my team. When I don't have the context from my team, the morale goes down, the quality of solutions go down because we can't create more than what we've been given. We can't think of more creative things. And so our purpose goes down and our efficiency, effectiveness, everything goes down. We go from missionary to mercenary because there is no mission. So let's get that out. Let's get the purpose of the mission out of the heads of our stakeholders. And we're going to do that by asking 5 different questions. So what we see at the roadmap is an end manifestation of the end answers to some questions that haven't been answered or questions that haven't been stated. So above the waterline, you see the roadmap. So these are the things like the Salesforce, the AI, the SSO type of stuff. And so what we need to do is uncover the reasoning that got us there. So which customers first? So that's the first question we're going to ask is, can we identify a more narrow persona? So I worked with one client and their executives to try to figure out a positioning statement, and they wanted to build an app for finance professionals. How narrow is that? To where I can say, who are we saying no to? People that didn't study finance? I mean, how many millions of people are out there that are finance professionals? They are finance professionals in every single company that exists in the world. So that doesn't narrow it down. We've got to get more narrow than that. And in that executive workshop, it took us over an hour just to get more specific than finance professionals. So it's not necessarily an easy question, but we should be able to make a choice. Every one of these is a choice that says no to something else in some way. Then when we have the persona, we've got to now figure out the right problem. So yes, finance professionals in these kinds of organizations in this area that struggle with this whole challenge, within that challenge that I've now narrowed down to, there's probably multiple friction points for them to get their job done. Which problem today are we going to start with? Which one's either most impactful? Maybe it's a prerequisite at the beginning of the workflow. Maybe it's something that fits our unique capabilities best, that we're known for. Maybe it's going to add a competitive advantage because nobody else can solve for this one. There's got to be just a reason that this is the problem and why. Then that creates then a competitive advantage. Like what? It's also why are we best suited at the same time for this? So there's two questions in this, like what advantage do we get from it? Now other competitors don't have it and they've got to follow us. Or why do we have an advantage in even building this? When we think about those three risks that are classic, the desirability, feasibility, viability. Feasibility is often looked at as like, can we build this thing? And now with AI, we can build pretty much anything as fast as we want to. So the feasibility question isn't necessarily, can we build it? It moves more towards, can we create a solution that's 10 times better than somebody else's? And that comes from our own internal unique advantage. When everybody uses AI for development, which is happening, then all the solutions end up looking the same. They're all as capable. So our advantage isn't just that we can build it. Our advantage has to be some unique experience. Maybe the way that our company's structured. Maybe it's the network effects of our customers. Maybe it's the expertise that we have in-house. We have lots of data scientists that focus on this area. So some advantage that's there that says why this problem for we get it out of it, and then why we're choosing to do it for ourselves. The harder question now is, what do you defer? When I talked to that CEO and I was trying to make him prioritize, I put the choice back on him thinking that was good because it gives him control. He's like, both. Both are important. Everything's important. Everything's priority. Let me know if you've ever heard that before. Everything is priority. We've got to just get it all done. And nothing's necessarily more important than another because they don't want to make the hard choice and they want to make you just get stuff done, move faster. So if you've experienced that, raise your hand or put something in the chat along the way with that too, because I find that's a common situation with these visionary types of idea people. They're not necessarily connected to how products are built and how they're, thank you, Lior, how execution is actually done. Yeah, which one of these do you want first? And I've asked the many variations of this question, still comes down to all of them. And so a lot of times people don't want to make that choice. And so you have to still uncover, okay, if I were to decide, how can I tell this one versus this one? What's the sequence there? And finally, this culminates into why this thing right now for us. The why this comes from the customer, the problem, the advantage, what we get out of it, the potential that's out there. And then the why now is like, this needs to come before this because technical prerequisite, or this is the timing in the market. This is something related to a regulatory impact. Maybe it's a launch date. So there's a now aspect of this one happens to be either more important or more urgent for some reason. You've got to put these things together. So let's look at maybe an example roadmap you might be handed. And this is similar to roadmaps I've seen before and still see. So Q1, we're going to ship a mobile app. Q2, we got Salesforce integration so that the sales team can do something well. Q3, there's our AI assistant because it's on every roadmap. And then Q4 is the enterprise SSO type of things. So if we look at this, there's no why in any of it. It's just on the list in a certain order. And if you wait for your backlog to be filled before you start grooming it, you're going to fail because there's no necessarily reason as to why this is here or there other than maybe effort. Either effort or noise coming from one of those stakeholders as to like which one seems more important based on how much people are yelling about it. So those two things help me groom my backlog. And there's no strategy in any of that. You're just kind of trying to make your way through it. So let's ask the questions of the list. The hard part we'll get into is the person. We're not going to interrogate the people with the ideas. We're going to still ask them questions at some point, but we will interrogate thoroughly the list that we get. Let's see if we can infer from what's on the list what might be the answers to those questions. So if we looked at mobile SSO or Salesforce or something, who's the customer? And in that case, we got three possible customers. So none of them are saying which customer first. It's all like, well, I mean, is that telling me if mobile was supposed to be first, does that mean that we need to go to customers that are on the go, users that are on the go before we get to the sales team? Maybe, maybe not, but at least we can see like which one implies what kind of customer. Are the problems that are experienced in here related in some way? No, it's just a queue of different things to do. The advantage that we're getting is we're catching up with competitors. That's not strategic. That's a race to the bottom in pricing typically and ubiquity. We don't want that. Competitive strategy is about differentiation, not matching competitor strengths. And then there's nothing that gets deferred, or at least not even implied as to what gets deferred, other than, hey, this thing just happens to be lower on the backlog for some reason. And then lastly, why this? Because somebody asked for it. That's not a great point, right? Okay, that should be a clue as to why we should, what we should be looking into next. So we don't have any good answers, yes, looking at it the way we have it today. So what we need is two things. We need a vision of where we're going, and a vision is actually what tells you what says no. If we know the destination of where we're going, that includes the main customer challenge and the competitive advantage we can create at the end of this in the world where a customer can accomplish some goal without some sort of friction. That gives us a picture to say, does this thing even fit in to the whole vision of where we're going? If not, it's a no. Now, your strategy says, here's my vision that lasts, maybe it's 3 years out, 5 years out, whatever it is, it's further out there. My strategy says, here are the milestones that we're going to take to get to that vision. So oftentimes people say your strategy is what says no. It's actually that your strategy says not yet. Your vision has already told you what's a no, what's out of it. So most of the time we get these roadmaps because there is no vision. There's no rubric necessarily to say no to anything. And then within that, because there's no vision, then there's no strategy. Because what's the path that we're going on? Well, we don't have a destination. So it's just really any direction. And so that's not a strategy either. So you need both things, the vision to say no, and then the strategy to say not yet. Otherwise, you cannot defend anything as these features come in. So the bigger challenge is let's go and say you've gotten a stakeholder that comes to you with all these different ideas, maybe an existing roadmap, maybe a plan that says, hey, you need to get all this stuff done by this time frame. And I know I've been in that situation before. I've also been in some really challenging personality situations too. Some people in very hierarchical organizations feel that asking questions is a challenge to their royalty. In other words, oh, I worked at a consulting company, a very, very large consulting company that had partners. Those people spent 20 years getting up to the partner track. And once you get to that level, well, you are often infallible, at least in your mind, as to anything, any opinion you have is true. And nobody below you should be questioning it. They should just be following direction. So what happens when you cannot ask why? What if you can't say, all right, I'm the gatekeeper here. You need to fill out my form before you can get onto my roadmap. Well, that's only going to piss people off no matter how you say it. So what we want to do is get the context for what's going on without necessarily harming the relationship or challenging it. And so what we need to do is figure out how can we ask. So here's some tips on how to work with some of those challenging personalities to be able to get your context without making them just say, just get it done anyways. All right, first is you want to lean in with curiosity. I covered this in the last lesson a lot if you want to go back and look at that one. I give you some questions that you can ask out of curiosity to gather context for a specific feature. So you have to come in as a student. These people, like I realized later on, the CEO could actually teach me something from the vantage point that he had that I was not acknowledging, I was not respecting. So honestly, I probably was being a little bit disrespectful by assuming that my strategy was sound already and I didn't need the stuff that he had to go into it. So I needed to be more of a student. And I needed to be humble and say, okay, I can learn from anybody, especially somebody at this level. Please teach me. What is it that I don't know? And people are way more willing to give you context when you come across as curious and come across as a student in those cases. Next is ask for the origin story. So I talked about this concept online on LinkedIn recently, and a whole lot of people ended up seeing it, about 150,000 people ended up viewing it. I got a lot of points about this. Instead of asking about the problem and the ROI and the business case, just ask them, hey, where does this come from? I'm very curious. Was there a certain specific moment for a client, or what's the stimulus behind it? This is where you need to know, this will help you narrow down the customer and the challenge a bit more. So which persona with which problem. And it also gives you a sense of the urgency. So if you ask for the origin story, people are more willing to do storytelling because they like talking about themselves and what they've done. So you're more likely to get things out of it. The other is the tone of voice. We often say we need to ask why 5 times. You've heard of the 5 whys. Well, now you sound like a toddler is the issue. So what we need to do is get to the same question with a different phrasing and a different tone. So I rarely actually use the question of why this or why now, but I need to know the answers to it. So I might say something that's a classic phrase that's a segue of, oh, tell me more, but also my body language, my tone of voice, my enthusiasm for their ideas helps me get that context out of it. So find the way to ask the question without asking the classic clinical product management question of what problem are you solving or why this one instead of something else. The other thing you can do is think about what matters to this person personally, professionally. Let's say you have a stakeholder that's a VP of sales. What do they care about? Well, I've taught before in strategic storytelling is we want to take the things that they're most concerned with. A VP of sales is concerned with losing customers, missing their quota, those negative things. And what we want to do is flip it around. Can we ask them questions that tell it about how they can win in that situation? So I want to see, oh, I know that you're constantly looking at winning new deals here. How does this fall into that? And so they can tell you about how it matters to them and why this is important to them as well. And then if you can't actually get access to the person or organization that gave you this mandate, try to go somewhere close by, go sideways. So, like, if it came from a VP of sales, but you can't get time with them, then you go to the rest of their salespeople, the people that report into that person, try to gather information above and around because you're going to have to answer those questions either way. And so you're going to make some guesses, and then maybe you're going to come back to that stakeholder or you're going to come back to the people around them to confer around that. Once you have that validated, then you can make better decisions about your roadmap. So you're going to then ask the same questions around them, and you're trying to get real answers now. So let's say that we went and did that. We talked to the stakeholder again in a non-challenging manner, maybe in the moment that they came to us. If not, we can go back to them or we can talk to people around them, and we got some better answers. So if we looked at the customer, we heard that actually it was more around mid-market teams that we were trying to affect this. So mobile app associated with mid-market operations teams. Okay, we've narrowed the customer a little bit. And so now we can start to say things on the roadmap now, this team is the most important persona to focus on. And then we can start to see which ideas fit that persona. Now, within that, mid-market operations teams is pretty general. What's the problem? Well, when they come on board to our platform, a lot of them are churning out in the very first month. So now we've gotten the problem area, and now the mobile app concept was meant to try to prevent early churn that the sales and customer success people were seeing but not articulating. They just gave us this feature idea. So now we're like, oh, okay, we've gotten to the problem churn. And so then onboarding is now the first priority that we need to look at. And what is it that we help those customers do? We help them get to value whatever fastest. So we're going to then start prioritizing things that create the advantage for us so that we can resell that. And then we can say, okay, well, what's not as important now that we know the customer, the bigger problem and our advantage, what is lower on that list? Because now I've gotten the first 3 things answered. And then the SSO and AI start to wait because they don't really fit that persona and that need as much. And so now we also want to understand the urgency of this idea first, because it came from sales and there were some stalled deals, or we see people leaving. Retention happens to be the bigger issue and success story. Okay, so we know that our biggest business problem happens to be associated with retention. And so now we're aligning our roadmap with a bigger problem that we're noticing. And that's why this is up here. Why now? Okay, so we got the list, we've done some interrogation, and now we've moved from the list of things to we need to win over mid-market operations teams in the first month where retention leaks the most. And now we're going to sequence our list of ideas against that, and we have a justification for why this thing goes first and this goes here, or why any of this is here. So does this idea help a mid-market operations team get to value faster to where that's going to help them or prevent them from leaking out in that first month? All right. So I want you to be thinking about that situation at the beginning. What was the add AI to the product type of roadmap item that you got? Thanks, Rahul. See you later. I know we're at 30 minutes now. What was the thing that was on your list? Can you figure out the customer problem? Why AI? Why did we end up doing this? Can you figure out why now? And if you can't, we can talk through some of those scenarios. I'd love to hear them. So be considering that, and then be asking these questions as we go. So here's your screenshot of questions you got. Which customers first? Which problem first? Which advantage do we have? Why are you going to win? What are you going to defer and why this? Why now overall? If you need to boil it down in your next meeting to make it even easier, you need to know who, why, and what we're deferring. And that's going to show that you have an actual strategy of choices made. Now, you don't have to show the whole vision and all the strategy that's out there as to which milestones you're going to go, but at least you can answer these questions for every feature that's out there. Thank you, Mike. See you later. Now, if you're curious, we took slices of a few different modules from what I teach. So the vision strategy, I talk a little bit about that here. The stakeholder judo, what we're making, like how do we take the energy of stakeholders, keep that positive, and then turn it into strategic wins. So if you're curious about how to do some of these things with real live role playing as well, and really get some reps on working through some of these hard challenges, the Influential PM is a course that I teach that I mentioned at the beginning that has 6 modules over 2 weeks to where you get to master that in a small group and be able to leave from going from getting told what to build to actually being able to be proactive in communication about what our strategy is, where people then respect you for what you've been doing. So if you're curious about that, you can sign up and at the QR code and the link there over the next 6 weeks. So now we have some time for either some roadmap features that you have, and then also if you have questions about it, anything else that you found that you want to ask more about, now's the time. So I'll open it up to Q&A. Okay, well, it was great seeing everybody. I know that I leave a little bit of time aside for that, but great we got to the content in 30 minutes so that some of those people could leave to their next meeting. Great seeing everybody. So this is session 2 of a learning series from feature manager to product leader. The first one we talked about was the stakeholder judo aspect. This is now reframing your roadmap. And lastly, we're going to talk about how do you even create then the metrics of success, the roadmap that you can then stand on in these situations. So I will see you next week at the next one. See you then. Bye, everybody.